Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Joy, would you mind running through our roster alphabetically?
Yes, Scott. Again, welcome to our SCAAC meeting. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, when I call your name, then you need to repeat your name and say present for our roll, because this is again an open meeting and it is being recorded. Kelly Bradley.
Kelly Bradley, present.
Scott Bruins.
Scott Bruins, present.
Taylor Bumgardner. Okay. Stacy Earl. Sarah Burnett. Casey Gissenhouse.
Casey Gessenhughes, present.
Hughes, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, thank you. Paula Jolly. Justin Mitchell. Teresa Nicholas.
Teresa Nicholas, present.
Valerie O'Rear.
Valerie O'Rear, present.
William Owens. David Trimble.
This is David Trimble. I'm present.
Amy Smith.
Amy Smith, present.
And Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so just a quick PSA, feel free to mute yourself and unmute yourselves as needed, but as Joy mentioned, please do keep your cameras rolling as it is a public meeting. Even if you have to step out to use the restroom, we can work in restroom breaks, but please keep cameras rolling just for the sake of transparency. All right, everybody should have a copy of this meeting's documents. Thank you, Joy, for sending those out. Specifically, get some feedback from Sarah.
Scott, we're having trouble hearing you.
Joy, are you able to mute Sarah?
Hello. Sarah?
Yes.
First, will you state your name and say you're present, and then mute your phone, please?
All right. My name is Sarah Burnett. I'm present.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah, for being here. Yeah, everybody should have a copy of this meeting's documents. Thank you, Joy, again for sending those out. The first document that we're going to look at is last meeting's minutes from July. Everybody should have a copy of those. I don't think that we need a whole lot of time to review these, as we did get these ahead of time, but if everybody wants to take a minute just to briefly look over that, let me know if any changes, amendments need to be made. Does anybody need any additional time? If anybody would like to move to accept these meeting minutes, please state your name and motion.
Casey Hughes, I make a motion to accept our July minutes.
Amy Smith, I'll second.
All right, we've got a motion and second. All those in favor of accepting our July meeting minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much. Moving on, we've got our appointment of chair and vice chair. Joy, would you be able to lead us through this? I believe your name's attached to that agenda item.
Yes. At this time, every September is considered the new year for SCAAC membership. At this time, I would like to open the floor to entertain a motion for a chairman and vice chair for this group moving forward for the 2021 school year. We can do that as one motion unless there are multiple nominees for chair or vice chair. So I'm going to open it up to the floor for a motion for our chair and or vice chair for the upcoming SCAAC year.
I don't mind reserving as chair, but I'd like to see some nodding and thumbs up.
We do need a motion though. So someone will need to say, I move that.
Well,
So-and-so.
Right. But in consideration for vice chair, I don't know if anybody wants to throw their hat in, but I would like to pick Casey. I don't for vice chair if she doesn't mind. Are there any names that we would like to consider?
I will happily make a motion that for Scott Bruins, or nominate Scott Bruins as chair of this committee and Casey Hughes as vice chair.
All right, we have a motion on the floor that we nominate Scott Bruins as chair for the School Curriculum Assessment and Accountability Council for the 2020-2021 year. And we also have a motion on the floor for Casey to be the vice chair. So at this time, do I hear a second to the motion?
Kelly Bradley, I'll second.
All right. Hearing this, we will then have a vote. If you will raise your hand, we will. Okay, motion carried. Congratulations, Scott and Casey. And I'll turn the meeting back to you, Chairman Scott.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate being able to get through that efficiently. I believe the next agenda item is assessment and accountability update with Rhonda and Jennifer. Or I take it I saw Jennifer's name. Rhonda, are you present as well?
Yes, I am. I was just trying to get my video to turn on. Sometimes that's a little persnickety. There it is.
Oh, good.
I'm just not fast. I need to go through some kind of lightning speed training to go from one to the other. I usually make it happen, but my speed needs to go up. But and I see Jennifer's there with us as well, and I'll kick it off, Jennifer, and then you want to just kind of go back and forth a little bit, or
sure, we can do that.
Yeah,
and I've got the presentation ready to pull up when you're ready.
All right. Good deal. And Joy, I'm not sure if we're going to have, is the commissioner planning to come in as a guest today?
Yes, he said he might drop in
Okay.
and to say
Okay.
hello. So,
Okay. So
I
you-
have not seen that he has
Okay.
signed in yet. So
Okay.
we'll just move on.
Well, and what I wanted to say to you, we want to obviously respect his schedule because it's, I mean, I'm sure loaded up now in his second official day on the job. I mean, when you are on Kentucky Educational Television on your first day, you're really just getting busy right out of the gate. And so you may have seen that last night. But Joy, if you notice Dr. Glass pop in, just let Jennifer and I know. We might not see that pop up. But if you watch for him and let us know, we'll just stop where we are and let him interact with the group, and then we can pick back up. We'll be happy to do that way. And I know he's got a student advisory group going on right now, so I'm not sure just the flow of his day. Again, I'm Rhonda Sims. Great to see lots of wonderful familiar faces and a few new faces. We appreciate you being with us today and participating in SCAAC. You bring such a valuable perspective to all of our conversations, and it's just very helpful to us and to the work. And we pulled together, mainly Jennifer and her work with her group has pulled together just a brief little PowerPoint. I think we have about just a little over 10 slides. Just trying to give you a sense of where things are right now as we move forward, because we're getting ready to talk about changes to the accountability system again. We'll be having a series of conversations with the Kentucky Board. You all have been very immersed in those conversations as we went through for the development of the last system. And so we know you'll have those that are experienced on this committee, those that are new. Welcome to a more frequent than expected conversation that we're having changes with assessment accountability. But we do want to try to make good decisions to advise the board in a positive way so that in the end we have systems that can work in Kentucky and support teaching and learning. So Jennifer, that's kind of my little start. You want to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. You may have some opening remarks too
Sure.
before we get started with the slides.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. And I'm Jennifer Stafford. I'm the director in the Division of Assessment Accountability Support. I work in Rhonda's office in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. Welcome to today. We really appreciate your input as we move along with the revision of the accountability system. SCAAC plays a very important role in the development of that regulation. So we look forward to your thoughts today and your input along the way. This will not be the only time that we engage in conversations with you on the accountability regulations. Congratulations, Scott and Casey, on your new positions, and thank you for your role in this very important group. So your leadership is very much appreciated. And I'm really loving the classroom and seeing the classroom and the kids. So please do not apologize for those kiddos. I mean, that's what we're all here for, and we're really that keeps us focused and grounded on what the reason that we're here. So do not apologize for them. It's enjoyable for all of us.
Jennifer, this is Joy. Let me interrupt just 1 second. I will, I know you heard that Rhonda and Jennifer have a PowerPoint for today. I did not send that out prior to you, so you don't have that, so you don't need to be looking for that, but I will send it to you after the meeting for your files.
Thank you, Joy. That presentation was finalized late, too late for Joy to send out. So that presentation we'll share with you. And let me share it now with my screen. Let me pull it up. And if you hear, I've heard that some people can hear my fan running. My computer fan is quite loud, so oftentimes people can hear my fan. So if you hear a swishing in the background, I'm not doing laundry. It is the fact that my computer is trying to keep itself cool. So yes, as Rhonda mentioned, we have an assessment and accountability update. Let's start out first with the assessments. As you know, last spring was a very disruptive educational experience for all of us, educators and parents across the Commonwealth as well as the nation. Spring assessments were canceled. Kentucky received a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education on assessments as well as accountability. So those assessments, spring assessments, were canceled in the March-April timeframe. We did, however, complete testing prior to that time. We had, in the fall of last year, the kindergarten screen was administered to our kindergartners, and that data was reported in December. So that administration of that assessment was completed. We also had the full administration of the access test. The access test is given to our students who have English as a second language, that it's not their primary language. So access testing is given to English learners in the January, February, early March timeframe for assessment of English language proficiency and how those English language learners are progressing toward the attainment of English language. And finally, we had an administration of the ACT. ACT was given on March 10th, on Tuesday, March 10th, and 95% of the students in Kentucky were able to complete testing on the ACT in March. So that's a really good percentage, and we're happy to announce that we do have an administration of the ACT for the fall. Now, fall ACT administration is not a usual occurrence for Kentucky. We did work with ACT to provide this additional opportunity for those students who were unable to complete ACT testing in the spring. So this opportunity, September 22nd, is coming up fairly soon, is an opportunity for those juniors in 2020 that were unable to complete the ACT administration for their state required or their state assessment, to have that opportunity to complete that testing. Now, we're offering this assessment for multiple purposes, none of which is more important than the student use of the assessments. Students use the ACT for multiple purposes, including college admissions, as well as scholarship opportunities. So we want to make sure that those students who were unable to take the ACT in the spring do have the opportunity to use those ACT assessments for those purposes. The next opportunity, if the school or district is unable to complete testing September 22nd, then an opportunity on October 6th is available, as well as October 20th. So we have three opportunities this fall for our students to take the ACT. Now, we are still in the midst of a pandemic, so there are guidelines that must be followed for the administration of the ACT. So the Department of Public Health, the Kentucky Department of Education, and the Office of Assessment and Accountability has worked with ACT on those guidelines. So those guidelines for safe at or healthy at school are all required to be followed during this administration. We also had scheduled, actually this week, the September 14th through 18th, a social studies field test. The social studies standards were approved last July. I want to say it was like July 5th of 2019. And that field test is ready to go. It was originally scheduled for the fall, but again, due to the pandemic, a lot of schools are closed to in-person sessions right now. A lot of remote learning or blended models. Schools are following those different types of models for the students this fall. So because of that, the social studies assessment, field test assessment was postponed. Now, we're monitoring the situation that we're in right now. We stand as a department and the vendor Pearson ready to administer the field test. So the forms are ready, the accommodative forms are ready, the materials, the manuals, all of those support materials that are needed for a field test, they're all standing ready to be delivered. We're in consultation with our schools and districts to see the next step of this pandemic, whether they're going to return to in-person sessions this fall or not. So as the pandemic unfolds, we'll know more about how the social studies field test can be administered. But we're committed to social studies testing and want to be able to provide that assessment and get the results from that field test. Now, the important piece of a field test is to have all of the proper representation from across all of our student demographic groups. We need all student demographic groups represented in the field test so that we have a good, valid, reliable result so that we can then take that data and analyze it to produce an operational assessment. So without proper representation of all of our student demographic groups, we'll be unable to have a field test. But we're, again, monitoring the current situation as it unfolds because it's evolving as we speak. So we'll continue to work with our vendor as well as the school and districts to be able to provide that opportunity for our students.
Jennifer, let me add one point to the social studies field test conversation. We have talked a little bit with Pearson, and they're in some studies on what one would call remote proctoring. You may be aware that there's been some attempts by some other vendors to do testing at home by computer. I would kind of describe that it's not quite ready for prime time yet. But there is some research being done on that, not just by Pearson, our main vendor right now, but by other companies as well. But we have not laid out plans for that to be what is occurring for this round of social studies field testing. But I know we've had a couple of questions around that. So the plan is not for students to be online at home in virtual instruction, but to be online in a school environment, just in case you get that question.
Thank you, Rhonda. And then for our state assessments for K-Prep, for alternate K-Prep, for access testing, then in ACT next spring, we are marching along preparing for the administration of all those assessments. Until we have otherwise plans for postponing or canceling those, we do plan to administer those. So we, as an agency and working with our vendors, we are making plans to administer those assessments. And I don't know, Rhonda, if you wanted to.
Yeah, let's talk just a little bit more around that.
Sure.
The Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has shared some communication with chief education officers, and I'm sure it's out on the U.S. Department of Ed website, I would imagine as well, around the department's position right now is they are expecting assessments this year. There was some discussion that some states might be poised or prepared to move to something more competency based, but actually there are very few states out there that probably have the infrastructure ready for that. New Hampshire, I believe, Jennifer, or I think it's New Hampshire that has an innovative grant where they've been doing a lot of work for years. And of course, they were not able to do very much last year to kind of have potentially that sort of system in place of where it's more performance based. And done kind of embedded within instruction to some degree. We don't see, we are hearing from our contacts that they're not ready to move forward with that, but there was some language in the letter. So just be aware, we continue to watch that. We know there have been public statements already with some legislative committees from different K groups that work as partners with the department that, they would be very interested in having another sort of break year given the, uncertainty of how school will play out and in terms of in-person versus virtual this year. But at this point, the direction the federal level has put out, and part of this was in response to Georgia. You're probably aware that Georgia, I think we talked about it last meeting, asked for a waiver from assessment and accountability and kind of put forth a plan using formative assessment instead. This, I think, was a response to that, as well as some other states who were starting to ask, are you willing to accept some sort of waiver? The message that came out of the letter was there would not be a blanket kind of waiver. Last year was no doubt the easiest piece of paperwork we have ever done for the federal government. It was a little short checklist that no, we will not be testing, and no, there will not be accountability. And I don't see that ever happening again, probably. But I do think, just to be aware that we're continuing to monitor that. There is more likely some flexibility on accountability side of things than on the assessment side. And, part of this, I heard Senator Stivers make this comment in response to a presentation back in the summer. There is a sense that you really want to have some abilities to see where students are on some sort of common measure. Districts are doing their job of looking at, how can I measure what loss of learning might have occurred or what slides, and they may be doing it through classroom-based assessments. They may have a program they've purchased. At the state level, we're able to get some kind of comparable data across districts when we're able to use a single measure like the state assessment. So there's a real desire to know where kids are in relationship to proficiency and to the measurement of our standards. So we're going to be monitoring it and watching it, but at this point, the most recent information we're seeing out of the U.S. Department of Ed is to be prepared for an assessment. And then, there might be some openness for how we maybe show our accountability and meet the federal minimum requirements on accountability. But and we'll have more information, I think, as the year progresses. But for right now, that's what we're hearing.
And to that point about assessments in the spring of 2021, state assessments are given for multiple reasons. There are lots of results of state assessments. State assessment results are oftentimes used in accountability, and Rhonda mentioned that may be a possibility for some flexibilities there this year. In addition, educators get information on student performance and where the student performance lies, and providing student results during a pandemic could be beneficial for everyone to see where the disruption happened and the impact on student performance because of the pandemic. It also identifies inequities across the student demographic group. So it would be beneficial and interesting to research how the impact of the pandemic impacted different student demographic groups. And then that leads to the last point, is those drive structural supports for our students. So that if those inequities are found, then structural supports can be provided for those students who need that additional remediation or those additional supports for that. So giving the assessments is beneficial in the fact that it provides additional information and data. Let me pause there. I think that's the last slide that we have on the state assessments, and see if our members have any questions.
Or perhaps comments, some advice for us to take away. Obviously, there's some, as we look at this last slide that's on the screen, there's some certainly unanswered sort of situations as we see how things play out this fall. I think one thing that has brought back, now that we've gone into the world of virtual, I am trying to practice my teacher wait time well. And so I think we did that pretty well, Jennifer. I think we waited and gave people some time there. But, I know you are not shy as a group. And as we kind of move along with the presentation, there may be some other things, and you might think of something with assessment. But we'll go ahead and talk a bit about accountability on this next section. And Jennifer, I don't know, are you trying to display your screen?
I am. So I couldn't see everybody's faces, and I wanted to see if anybody had questions or comments. And I was trying to go look back at the screen, because all I was seeing was the PowerPoint.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I just wanted to say that this is Kelly Bradley. I appreciate your comment about assessment, and I think that that is a consistent message that we're going to need to deliver to families, teachers, community, to know that I think it's just really critical that no one sees assessment as punitive in this current time, and that we see it as an opportunity. I mean, I think that there were some good comments out by a few people just in social media, basically like, we can't even know where the gaps are. We can't know if there was growth, or it's not all negative. Like, something could have worked well too, right? In the remote, because we keep saying, well, we have to know where the gaps are. Well, we could also find that something worked really well. So I wanted to say, I appreciate those comments. And I just think that's a very consistent message that we need to keep getting out to people.
I think that's great. And we appreciate that remark too, Kelly. So Jennifer, I see you found the accountability slides. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the fact that we are going to start bringing forward to you some regulatory language in your next meeting to look at, and we'll start having some conceptual conversation with the board at their October board meeting. So Jennifer, I'll kind of start with the next slide, and then let you step in on anywhere along the way. You step in and feel free to then do the next one. But let's we're cutting off just a little bit of that, Jennifer. I don't know if your screen needs to be opened up just a little wider. There you go. So you're aware that Senate Bill 158 passed last legislative session, and it does put some change in effect for the state to embed in its accountability system. And, regulations are meant to sort of give further definition to statute, but there's some very specific things in this statute, more specific than sometimes statutes are a little more broad than this, but there's some very specific things that have changed that we'll need to then get into reg language and look at how it plays out in implementation. The changes include the concept of state indicators. Now, that's not totally foreign to what we've talked about before. We've used the word indicator, but it uses a really important modifying word here, exclusively. So it does define that SB 158 exclusively lists what will be the indicators for accountability. not kind of a broad concept that says go forth and create indicators, but very specific on the indicators. And I think we have those on an additional slide coming up. It also requires that the state indicators be looked at sort of through two lenses. The idea of status, and status is how have you performed in the current year. And then it also requires that we look at change for the indicators. And change is about what has been the difference in your performance from the current year to the prior year. So the bill does lay out the concept that change would not come in until the second year of the system. And of course, we're already will be a bit, delayed because we did not have data last year. So it starts out with a notion of status only, and then a combination of status and change. And it really talks about those being an equal weighting or an equal measure. Now, as we look at how they interact with each other, one of the things we'll need to talk to with the board and then bring back through in regulatory language are there exceptions to any of that arrangement? For example, if you have a school that's very high performing on status, there is little opportunity to increase as part of change because you're already sort of up at the top. And what might be some special rules or background business rules, they're usually referred to in the assessment world, for calculating that. Do you need to look at that? What is the thinking of the board on those kinds of things? So requires, there's also a requirement that the overall performance of a school and status and change, that all of that be displayed on a dashboard online, and I think it specifically uses some language around color coding. So you are aware that we already have in our school report cards some color coding to indicate sort of where you are on indicators. So I think of this as an expansion of that somewhat. If you are following what's happening in multiple states, as we've mentioned before, some of these terminologies such as status and change and dashboard is used particularly in the California model. And so what you see in this law is a bit of a modified version of that. So I think the next slide, Jennifer, you have actually the reminder of the indicators. Is that right? Do you want to review these with the group and then we'll kind of go back and forth here a little bit?
Yes, thank you. So with the comparison of within status and change, so when we talk about status, the status is the current year performance. So that's what we're used to and what we've done for many, many years is that current year performance. So change is the difference in that performance from the current year to the year prior. It's different than growth. So it's different in the fact that for each of these two big buckets, we're looking at the whole school. So the whole school, how did the whole school do on status and how did the whole school do on change? Now that's different from growth in the fact that growth was student to student. But for these indicators, it's school to school. So let me give you an example. Is that you have a elementary school that's grade 3, 4, and 5, and how they performed in status in year, let's say 2019. So then those students will be compared to the students in that elementary school the year before in 2018. So those are two different cohorts of students because those fifth graders from 2018 have moved out and new third graders have come in. So it's different cohorts of students in change, not individual growth from student to student or from student from one year to the next. So that's a bit different, and that is going to play in when we talk about one of the indicators here momentarily. So think about status and change for each of these indicators. So in the current system we had reported in 2019, in the fall of 2019, we had proficiency for reading and math. We had separate academic indicators for science, social studies, and writing. Growth, which was that individual student performance from one year to the next. Quality of school climate and safety, which we did not have that measure included in accountability because we had not developed the instrument or administer that instrument. Graduation rate for high schools and transition readiness. So those were the indicators for the current system that also was impacted by achievement gap. So achievement gap was impacted, the accountability system was impacted if the school had a 4-star or a 5-star rating and had a significant achievement gap. So you recall if those schools that have a 4 or 5, if they had an achievement gap, then those stars were reduced by 1. So a 5-star was reported as a 4-star and a 4-star was reported as a 5-star. From that, Senate Bill 158 made changes specifically in the terminology of state assessment results. So for reading and math and for science, social studies, and writing, it will be state assessment results for reading and math and state assessment results for science, social studies, and writing. And I will note for you that writing will include on-demand writing as well as an editing mechanics assessment. So that will be included in the next time we get to report accountability results. Then progress toward achieving English language proficiency for English learners. I talked momentarily about the access test, and this indicator will report from at the student level indicator that the growth for our English learners on that access test. So where previously the requirement to include this progress toward English language proficiency was in growth at the elementary school and transition readiness at the high school, it now becomes a standalone indicator in and of itself. The school qualities, the quality of school climate and safety survey will again be its own indicator. We now have an instrument, a survey that has been field tested as well as administered statewide this past spring when we had a field test. So actually today, maybe why we are talking here, since we've started that those data have gone out to our schools and districts. A graduation rate, both the combination of the 4-year and 5-year rates will be included in accountability. And then the terminology post-secondary readiness comes directly from the bill, the Senate Bill 158. So there's a little bit of nuances, differences in that post-secondary readiness because Rhonda mentioned the word exclusively in the bill. So there were additional offerings within the transition readiness beyond what the statute had called for. So when it means, when it says exclusively, we think that that's limiting in nature. And so those additional offerings within transition readiness will not be available for the post-secondary readiness. Now, oftentimes when we think post-secondary, in our minds, it automatically goes to post-secondary education. But post-secondary is merely after high school, because high school is secondary education. So it's post-secondary, so after high school. So that readiness can be either academic or career. So that's some training that we have to develop around that, thinking that post-secondary is not just education, but it also could be career as well. Achievement gap plays a part in reporting only. Achievement gap per Senate Bill 158 does not impact accountability whatsoever as far as the ratings go, but it does indicate that the achievement gaps or the differences in student performance will be included in a school report card. So we're going to have that differences in the comparison between the system that was reported in 2019 and the upcoming system. So we've talked a little bit before when we were with you in the summer about the upcoming regulations, but the upcoming Board of Education meeting, we're going to talk about the significant changes to the regulation. There are 4 really big pieces that are impacted in the accountability. The first is change, measuring and evaluating change. The second is measuring and evaluating the progress toward English language proficiency for our English learners. The next is the weighting of each of these indicators within the accountability system. And finally, the minimum N, or the minimum number of students needed for each of the student demographic groups to be included in accountability. So those are the 4 main topics that Rhonda, Kevin Hill, and I will be discussing with the board in October. So we wanted to get your thoughts on these 4 big significant changes in the accountability system. So Rhonda, I'll start with change, and then if you want to add or pick up where I leave off, and we'll just kind of go back and forth.
Sounds great.
Okay. So we've talked about change. This change is the difference between the current year and the prior year. So for example, and I've used it here for academic proficiency, which that would be either those state assessment results or the state assessment results for reading and math or science, social studies, and writing. You would take that indicator and those scores and compare it to the year before. Now that seems really simplistic, but when you actually get into the data and trying to make that comparison, there is a lot of nuances that must be thought through and developed in the design of the accountability system. When we did some evaluation, we found a couple of things. The first of which is that not all schools increase, that there is a statewide average for 2018-2019 where there was an average decrease in performance. So when you look at that change, because as Rhonda mentioned, it's 50% of the overall accountability weight. So how do we determine that overall accountability when we have negative change? So that's going to be a discussion for the Kentucky Board of Education to discuss. Now, in the previous accountability system, Teresa Nichols, I'm going to call you out just a little bit. You talked and we're on a work group about change. And you know that we've had a couple of different approaches to negative. One of which we had and used literally negative numbers in the accountability system. So what we had previously, I want to say until like 2017, 2018, somewhere around there, we had a value table that calculated negative points toward the accountability system, where that if there was negative growth, then there were negative points. Now, that was not popular, and it was not a situation that that our schools wanted to be in, where they felt like that they had earned points in the accountability system for other areas, and because of this one indicator, those points were taken away. We brought together a advisory group that worked through that. Teresa was part of that group that advised that a different approach was preferred. So the accountability system was updated in the fact that negative numbers were removed and zeros were included where those negative points were previously. So that's determination of, we've got this measure of change. How do we measure and evaluate it and include it into an accountability system? Should we use negative numbers or different or more positive numbers on that? So that's one piece of change that we need to talk through. Secondly, we do find that there is enough change that we can differentiate between our schools and districts. So the intent of change is, what's the purpose of change? Is it to hold very high schools performance and push them in a direction that they need to move? Is it one that we allow schools to show and be recognized for incremental changes to that? So all of which, all of those kind of contextual questions lead to design of the system. We also know, and this is a lot I'm throwing out, so we'll unpack some of this. We also know that for some of the indicators, there's very little room for change. For example, our graduation rate is very high. In Kentucky, there's about the 94, 95, 96, 97 range is the range of typical scores for our graduation rate. Well, if we're thinking about 100%, that margin of improvement is small. So there's a decision on how to implement this change measure when you have such high performing schools in each of these measures. So a lot on this change measure. It sounds simplistic and it sounds pretty easy to implement. You just take one year and compare it to the next, and then you get the difference. But actually, to implement it into an accountability system, it leads to a lot of questions and a lot of design questions for us. So let me pause there, Rhonda, and see if what you have to add.
Sure, Jennifer. We mentioned earlier this notion of business rules, and it is that relationship that we'll need business rules around the relationship to change. It is certainly the most complex thing that's in this new legislation. We also obviously have looked a bit at California, because this is quite similar to California's model, and we've had some discussions with the U.S. Department of Ed just to sort of get some advice and get some clarifying questions. And I think one of the things that was a standout for me, and Jennifer, you certainly disagree if you didn't feel that way, as we kind of talked a little bit, California's model wasn't implemented this simply either. So change in California system is sort of this idea of 50%, but in reality, in order to have their plan approved federally, they've had to tweak certain elements of the system, and in order to meet the federal guidance. And obviously, we will need a system in the end that does check all the boxes federally. And even in our state law, we have some language that says, and do what's necessary to be compliant with ESSA. So just know that, again, it's one of those classic examples of something that sounds so simple on the surface that is anything but to get it in place. Status really doesn't cause us to blink in any way, shape, or form. We've done that for many years. It's quite easy to measure what are you doing in a single year. But when you start combining it, putting it together in this way, it can get really a little bit difficult. And, it's really setting up this notion that Jennifer talked about earlier, not a kid by kid look as much as how the school is performing one year compared to the next. So quite different than what we've had with growth. And we will need the federal government to talk with us about clarifications of then how do we measure progress for ELs. Because with ELs, it really in the federal law requires it to be a kid by kid look. And so that kind of leads us into the next topic. We have kind of 4 big buckets we need some kind of just conceptual discussion with the board. We have asked the Center for Assessment to do some research and analysis for us as well. So they've been doing that across the summer and looking at how the numbers play out. And of course, they bring a national perspective to the work. And you've met Brian Gong and others from that group before at SCAAC. So one of the things that is different is that the federal law requires that we do look at the progress our English learners are making toward attaining and the acquisition of English language skills. So everyone knows we administer the WIDA assessment for that. And in the last accountability system, we blended together the progress on EL with the growth measure at elementary middle. And remember, that measure is not in the exclusive list of what is an accountability, so that can't be blended anymore. And at high school, it had been blended with transition, though there'd been a lot of questions around that. And we had a lot of conversations with the U.S. Department of Ed when we went through our last approval of the state plan. So what we'll take forward to the board is the idea of separating the element out and treating it separately, which is what most states do, and looking then at how to value it or how to weight it in the system. Before, we allowed sort of a natural weight to develop based on what proportion of kids you had in your district that met EL status or were in EL status. So the range of how much it counted in accountability varied based on if you were a district with lots of students or a district with just a few. When you separate it out, most states just set an amount of weight for it across the board. You still could look at some kind of sliding scale as well. But this is one where even though the state law kind of calls for that look of school compared to school across time or like the cohort of students, with the EL, our federal feedback has been it will have to be looking at student to student in terms of their improvement and progress, and then applying a weight to that, like using a value table in the system. So Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything you want to add around the EL portion of this conversation.
No, I think you've done a good job there, Rhonda. And it's just, we'll have to work through with the board if there's like, for example, a value table on that student by student progress, or if they would like for us to take a different approach. So a lot of conversation about how to design the accountability system. So we've got two more big topics. You want to pause here, Rhonda, and see if our members have comments or?
Sure, we can. And let me add one thing to the conversation on our English learner. We have been approached as we've gone to the board with other pieces of accountability. There is some federal flexibility allowed for students who are entering U.S. schools late in a school career. So maybe they're a 17-year-old coming in for the first time to a U.S. school, or a 16-year-old much later than our normal start times of 5 and 6. There's also some flexibility around interrupted schooling. We all know a thing or two about some interruption now, but, this was mainly around students that are coming from countries where they may have been in refugee camps. The whole society has kind of fallen apart. There's been war, there's been, natural disasters, and they've not had any opportunity for any educational experience. And then there's a third one, isn't there, Jennifer? There's like three flexibility pieces.
It
I'm
is.
trying
The third one is the proficiency level where they come in at. So
that's
their
right.
proficiency level.
Their screening skill, or like where they come in with language.
That's
So
right.
for years we've had the ability in our reg to build in some of this flexibility, but we want to make sure that's really part of the system moving forward, so it's clear to everyone. And so one thing we will want to bring forward to the board is their opinion of that. And obviously we would recommend that we look at embedding those flexibilities. For instance, if we did a value table, we would embed some options for that. So that's one of the things we want to discuss as well, is making sure we take advantage of that flexibility and give kids the time they need in those circumstances to gain language skill. So I think we're right, because and Joy, you kind of keep us honest on time. So if we have time, we could pause here to just see if we have a couple of comments or questions on change and English progress. And, remember, you will be seeing the first round of regulatory language at the next meeting, but let's see if you have some comments for us or questions.
Scott Bruins here. Am I understanding correctly that student growth will still be individually measured and reported, but it just won't be considered an overall accountability?
Well, I mean, that would be something the board could discuss, about some level of reporting, but we know it can't be an accountability. At least our interpretation is that when it says exclusively, that here's the list of what will form accountability, we believe it doesn't lend itself to opening that up without statutory change, without the statute changing. So we have not had the conversation, could some things be reported in addition to or different than accountability yet. That's always something we can consider. If we have data, we could always consider reporting data. But at this point, we've really focused the conversation around what would be forming accountability and ultimately yield to identification of the bottom 5% of schools in terms of performance that we're required federally to do. So I think that's a great question. And one, as we go and talk to groups and talk to the board, that may get brought up. But at this point, we don't feel like growth can be part of the formal accountability.
Right.
At least that's our current interpretation. Now, Jennifer and I are not attorneys, so obviously we'll have attorneys be weighing in on that as well. But our read of it is it can't be part of that. Good question, though. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. These are the last two. So we have kind of 4 big topics for the board. And the first one is, how do you combine multiple things together and then yield that kind of final status? And then the balance between including students, making sure that you have reliable data and results, and simplicity. And that really gets to the notion of a minimum in count. How many students should be being reported? So Jennifer, I don't know, do you want to start with this one and then I'll add to you? I don't know if we obviously we're just kind of going back and forth here today with you informally.
That's right. So the accountability system for Kentucky, in the the bill in Senate Bill 158, it did allow for combining the indicators into an overall score. That's going to make our system more simplistic than the California model. So the California model, they did not bring everything together into an overall score. They used more color coding. So we feel like that it will bring simplicity in pulling all of our indicators into an overall score, and therefore we would be able to more easily identify that bottom 5%, because when you have literally numbers instead of colors bringing things together, it will bring simplicity to that identification. Now, as we've mentioned, the weights here, we know that status and change are 50%, 50-50. So the discussion here is about the indicator weights within those two big categories. So how can we bring all of those indicators of state assessment results, progress toward English language proficiency for English learners, quality of school climate and safety, graduation rate, and post-secondary readiness? What are the weights, bringing those together into that overall score? And that really leads to, honestly, the value that the board puts on the measures. Our previous board, they had certain values, and those reflected in the percentage of weights that they decided for the accountability system. The new board will want to engage in that conversation and develop their opinion and their influence on the value of each of those indicators. So that's going to be a big topic of conversation on the next board meeting, is specifically the weights within, again, each of those big status and change categories, because the categories of status and change are 50-50, but with underneath those, what's the percentage of weights of those each indicators that would then contribute to those status and change scores. So it gets, again, to their relative value on each of those indicators. The only other note that I would make on this topic of the weights is that there are federal requirements of for how much that final indicator of school quality and student success can count. The federal law, as we understand it, says that the academic pieces must be the majority of the weighting of the overall accountability system. So we know that one of those parameters that we have is that the quality of school climate and safety survey cannot be the majority within those buckets. So that will be one of piece of discussion we'll have with the board.
You may remember during the last conversations on accountability, we kept referring to 51% that you had to have, at a certain, for instance, at high school, you had to have at least graduation rate and academic performance count at least 51% of your system, kind of as a minimum expectation. So those are those kinds of rules that Jennifer's talking about. Now, for the last piece where it talks about inclusion and this balance between reliable data, including all students, and reaching simplicity, that really shows up with how do you set a minimum in for use and accountability. We already kind of have a minimum in for reporting, which is 10, and we've used that same in for accountability. But there was a lot of legislative discussion and some language last year to raise that to 30. You may remember we had lots of discussion about it in the last system. So we feel like we have a new board. This is another topic we need to bring through the board and have them weigh in on it. I think in general, I would describe it as the higher you raise the number the fewer student groups may be included in particularly small schools. And the higher you raise that in count. Also, though, having a higher in count does naturally bring some more reliability to data. So it is a balance between that reporting and what kind of rules would you have in place. Even though Kentucky has a 10 rule, we look at that by grade. So for a normally configured elementary school, it turns out being more like 30, because did you have 10 in the 3rd grade, the 4th grade, and the 5th grade? Where it gets to be more of an issue is when you have 10, but you only have one grade level of a test contributing. So I only have one 4th grade test for science, only one 5th grade test for social studies. So you get some there where 10 students are being really bringing part of the system in with that grade comparison versus 30 across the levels. So this is a sticky wicket topic. People have opinions on it. We've had legislation on it. And so we'll be eager to have that conversation with the board and show them some data related to that. What does it look like as you raise the number to a different level? How many groups would not be reported that are currently reported? We have a little bit of data and detail of analysis that we can share on that. Jennifer, I'll pause and see what you would add to that one.
Rhonda, Jennifer, we have had one question come in chat, and it's from Kelly Bradley. Why model after California? I'm not sure you could find a more different state.
I would say you're right on with it being different, just in terms of their indicators of change. There's a lot more range of score, for example, even in their graduation rate than we have in our graduation rate. We're all clustered up really high and they're really kind of spread out. But, as to why to do that model, you'd really have to talk to the legislators on that, because that is just what the final bill, that was not something that obviously came from our office, but that was part of the legislative discussion. I think there was attraction to the idea of the dashboard, the idea of recognizing when there is change that is positive, and being able to show performance using color as part of the dashboard. So I think there are some things in the California model that probably people found very positive and attractive. But I will say to you, and we passed this along at the time the legislation was being created, we did have folks say to us at the federal level that it is the most complicated system in the country. And so obviously that was not something then our assessment folks were saying, yes, let's please go do the most complicated system in the country. Because again, it looks simple in terms of its language, but its application is highly complicated to meet the federal law. That's my take on probably some of the things that were attractive to the bill writers around, and to the legislators that sponsored the legislation around California. But again, for a deeper reasoning around that, we'd need to ask some opinions there. Jennifer, I don't know if you'd have anything to add to Kelly's.
We also talked with the U.S. Department of Education on the California model, and we, as we were going through the process, and they indicated that the federal government had a hard time understanding it as well, and the approval process for their ESSA state plan was long and difficult. They even had representatives from California had to fly in to Washington to explain it. So we again have a modified version. and I said earlier, the fact that we can bring everything into an overall score and that makes it a lot more simplistic than we would have to use that color coding. We've done that once before in state accountability, where we had different measures and different performance levels had to be met, or thresholds, and that was an incredibly difficult system to understand. So the fact that we can bring all of those indicators together into one measure then makes it a lot easier to explain.
We used that the year that we reported only whether you were CSI, TSI, or other. And so that was the year that we did a true dashboard without rolling anything together. And that is more the California approach. So Jennifer, I think ends with the timeline. I know we have some other presenters waiting to present. So
yes,
kind of concluded out here. So Jennifer, you want to do the timeline?
Yes, I shared this earlier with you when we were together in the summer. We talked with the board in August with other presenters on just the overall aspect of Senate Bill 158 to those big impacted areas. Rhonda, myself, Kelly Foster, and Mickey Ray presented on those in August. Just kind of giving them an update that here it's coming, that these regulations are coming. October, so in a couple of weeks, we're going to go back to them for direction and guidance. Then after that October meeting, then we have our next SCAAC meeting scheduled in November. So at that time, we'll bring to SCAAC a draft regulation so that you will see the draft regulation based on the guidance and direction the board gives us in October. After we present to you all in November, get your good feedback, then we'll take the draft regulation to them in December for the first read, then back to them in February for a second read, and it'll go into a 60-day public comment period during March and April. In June, we'll do the statement of consideration and move into legislative committees next summer. So hopefully this time next year, we'll have an approved regulation as well as working through a approved ESSA state plan. So let me ask if there are any final comments and questions for Rhonda and I before we turn it over to Kelly Foster and Whitney Crow.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say, thank you. Awesome job. And that is a lot of work and much, much appreciated from everybody from our perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey. We appreciate that.
You.
All right. Well, we'll be motoring through some more changes with you.
Could you flip back to slide 6, if you don't mind? I think it was 6. Oh, yeah, that one there. Yeah. So let me just clarify as I'm trying to wrap my mind around this future system. So you said sort of a 50-50 breakdown between status and change, and that would be regarding those blue headings there. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So think about that for status, you'll have each of those. Status will have state assessment results, progress on English language learners, quality school climate safety, and at high school graduation rate in post-secondary readiness. Now that first year, we'll only have status because we won't have that comparison to the prior year. So for the first year, if that's 2021 or if it's 21-22, we'll have to again watch how the pandemic unfolds, but we'll have status. And then when we have change, think about all of those indicators, those same indicators, and how that current year performance compares to that prior year performance.
But good question, and you got it. You got it clearly there.
And you were saying that the board has to figure out how to weight these categories, correct?
How to weight the indicators within that status and within that change. And now what we think that they'll do is it'll have one weight for both of those, so that it'll be the same weight. Let me give some examples. Like if they say state assessment results are 50%, it'll be 50% within status and then 50% within change.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're eager to just see their thinking on it and see kind of where they would place their sort of priorities in a sense. All right, thank you guys. Always good conversation, good questions. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. Yep, like Rhonda mentioned, next up we have school improvement procedures with Ms. Foster and Crow.
Good morning, everyone. Let me see if Jennifer, have you unshared your screen, and I'll start sharing mine?
Yes, I stopped sharing.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, here it comes.
Okay, great.
Yep, it's there.
Is it big enough for everybody?
It's cut off just at the bottom, just a tad. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, great. Good morning to all of you all. I will be much more condensed than Rhonda and Jennifer. They have the whole bag of tricks with accountability and assessment. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about school improvement and some changes from Senate Bill 158. My policy advisor, Whitney Crow, she joined you guys. She's here with us today, but she joined you all last time and talked a little bit more about 158. So this isn't the first time you're hearing this, but some of the changes that I do want to say, we have a positive change with Senate Bill 158 in the world of school improvement. So before 158, the language that was in our state ESSA plan that had been approved by the feds, and the language in Senate Bill 1 2017 around targeted support and improvement schools did not match. And so we needed to get that cleaned up in 158 to match the federal law. And so we were able to do that during this last session. So we very much appreciate the legislators working with us on that. So I will go through both of these new definitions. And I think you've probably seen them once before. We have shared these with the board at kind of that informational meeting that Rhonda referenced. I believe that was our June meeting. Or no, our August meeting. And then we will be going for our first read of the school improvement reg in the October meeting. So as you can see, beginning in the 2021 school year and annually thereafter, the department shall identify a school for targeted support and improvement if the school has one or more of the same subgroups as identified by ESSA who perform in the state accountability system by level at or below that of all students in any of the lowest performing 5% of schools for 3 consecutive years. And then the part B of that is beginning 21-22 school year and every 3 years thereafter, the department shall identify a school for additional targeted support and improvement if a school has one or more subgroups as defined by ESSA whose performance in the state accountability system by level is at or below the summative performance of all students in any of the lowest performing 5% of all schools identified under subsection 3A of this section, and the school was identified in the immediate preceding year for targeted support and improvement as described in paragraph A of the subsection. So a lot of technical language there. The key piece to this is that what is in our state law now matches what has been approved by the feds, and this will make life very much easier for everyone in the school improvement world. This next slide basically breaks that down in what you will see in school training materials that we will send out. It's a little bit more user friendly. You have the definition of the TSI, you have the definition of the ATSI. Of course, we are not identifying any new CSI, TSI, or ATSI schools this fall because there wasn't a state assessment taken in the spring. And my office is also following along everything that's coming out of Ed, along with Rhonda and her team, as far as what assessment and accountability is going to look like for the 2021 school year. Just so you know, our field staff, our education recovery staff are still serving the schools that were previously identified CSI and previously identified ATSI. So we're still working with them on a daily basis. Okay, some other big changes around Senate Bill 158 in the world of school improvement. You will see on this slide, the major one, besides the definitions of TSI and ATSI, is moving the identification of CSI schools to every 3 years, beginning with the 21-22 school year. So previously, we identified CSI schools every year, and Senate Bill 158 made the change that you move that identification to once every 3 years. Another big change is that KDE is required to do all of the audits for the CSI schools. In the past, we have typically done the majority of the audits, but the previous legislation did give a district an opportunity to go with an outside vendor. Senate Bill 158 gives the full authority to KDE to conduct the audits for all CSI schools. A big change that was requested by a lot of superintendents is that Senate Bill 1 2017 did not have an appeal process if a district or principal was found to not have capacity. So Senate Bill 158 puts the appeal back into an appeal process back into the law. And then another big change was that it mandates turnaround efforts in CSI schools be led by an entity on the KBE's approved turnaround vendor list, which is defined in the bill and may include teams staffed by KDE. So if you'll remember back around 2009, 2010, when we had persistently low performing schools, the Kentucky Board of Education at that time was required to have a vendor list to support school turnaround. And then that went away through different pieces of legislation. So that will be back in effect for the, let's see, 21-22 school year, if we can make it till then. So if you had a school that was identified as CSI, you would have an approved turnaround vendor list that was approved by the Kentucky Board of Education that you can choose from to help lead the turnaround work. And KDE and our resources, our education recovery staff, would still be a possible choice as one of those vendors on that list. And then beginning in 2023, KDE must submit an annual report to the Interim Joint Committee of Education regarding the performance of those turnaround vendors. So once again, what you see on this slide are the major changes in Senate Bill 158, around school improvement. We will be taking our regulation to the board in October for the first read, and then to December for the second read. And if everything goes smoothly and we go through the legislative process on time, we should be implementing implementing our new school improvement reg for the 21-22 school year. And I will be glad to take any questions that you might have over anything that I just shared with you. Ours seems so simple compared to everything that Jennifer and Rhonda shared.
I do have one question.
Sure.
So you mentioned that under this plan, CSI schools would be identified every 3 years.
Yes, sir.
Does that also mean that once a school is identified as CSI, that they will have that designation for a full 3 years?
No, the exit criteria was previously changed, so they can exit if they meet the criteria in 1 year.
Gotcha.
Great question. And I will say it feels good to be back talking about school improvement. I feel like we've all spent so much time talking about reopening of schools and COVID and all the resources around that, it does feel good to be in a meeting about what my real job is about. So it's good to hear good educational conversation. All right. Well, I appreciate your all's time this morning.
All right. Thank you. We appreciate you all.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Let's.
Scott,
yes.
This is Joy. I believe we have a new member who is on our participation list, Stacy Earl. So Stacy, if you can, would you mind saying that your name and that you are present? If you'll take your phone off of mute. Well, maybe she will in a few moments. It shows her as being available, and but she does have her phone on mute, or her microphone on mute rather. So let's move on, and then maybe she'll be able to say she's available soon.
Okay, and I would encourage her and everybody else to keep your videos running, again, for the sake of transparency. All right, so moving on, we've got an amendment to regulation for NTI. I believe we have Mr. Cook.
Yes, thanks, Scott. I'll be even more brief than Kelly was, so you won't see my face for very long. You all, we've talked about this amendment previously. This is the second read of this amendment to the NTI regulation, and it is pretty self-explanatory. If you look through the regulation, what is happening, and I'm going to pull up just real quickly a PowerPoint that I have. I can get it going here. Can't see which one it is. I think that's it. There we go. Just a real quick slide, actually just one slide primarily. Basically what is happening with non-traditional instruction, particularly with the planning process and the actual application process, is that the applications that districts presented to us for this school year that we're starting right now will be the last time, if this regulation is approved, that we will have a separate NTI application moving forward with our school districts. The regulation change is to spell out that process, which will now become embedded into your comprehensive district improvement plan, your CDIP, just like most everything else related to school improvement is. The idea is to make non-traditional instruction become more a part of the way you plan for your school year, so that you're not thinking about it as a separate thing, but it's a continuation of learning, which is exactly what the statute requires it to be. And it spells that out as the name of the plan. So in your CDIP process of building your CDIP each year, what's going to happen beginning with 21-22 is you're going to be building out a new diagnostic, which is in your CDIP, for a continuation of learning plan, which in essence is the exact same questions that your NTI application previously asked, plus some additional information. But it's the design is to shift this more to be more cohesive and part of your process of planning for school improvement, not something separate that people have done as they've done in the past. So it's just really, that's the primary point that I wanted to make. It is something that went pretty quickly through the first round with the State Board of Education. We have not had any comments about it to this point. It will be shared again, of course, with LSAC right before the October board meeting, but there have been no changes to it since it went through its first reading. So that's really all I had to share. I just wanted to bring it to your attention again that it will be presented for final approval by the state board at their October meeting, and then it will go through the normal process of approval through the legislature.
It seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of, if you have any questions about it, we've been thinking about this for a long time and hearing from a lot of folks. And I think the pandemic has heightened this, that we're trying very hard in the work that we're doing to support districts with NTI to sort of start to think about instructional design more seamlessly than it's over here for in-person and it's over here for virtual, and to think about it more as just part of what we do if we have to close again. So, any questions?
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
And I see one last agenda item for us today with COVID-19 reopening guidance, specifically with English learner programs. We have Ms. Sudduth.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Let me share my screen here. All right, can you see it? Okay, thank you. My name is Erin Sudduth, and I'm a program consultant for Title I Part A and Title III, although today I'm here just for the Title III English learners part of my job, and I work alongside Jessica Sanderson, who's our other Title III program consultant. We've received a lot of questions related to providing services to English learners during the pandemic. So on Monday, August 31st, we released a guidance document for reopening in regards to English learners, just to answer some of those frequently asked questions. So districts have legal obligations to English learners and their families under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. And districts are still responsible for meeting these obligations during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the obligations that I'm going to be focusing on today is to identify English learners. So Kentucky's standardized EL entrance procedure includes screening all of our potential ELs using one of the WIDA English Language Proficiency Screeners. Unfortunately, these screeners, that's the kindergarten WAPT and the WIDA screener online, they cannot be administered remotely or virtually. Our guidance document outlines some different methods for meeting these obligations to EL students and their families during the pandemic. For example, if the district cannot administer the appropriate in-person WIDA screener, they can place the student temporarily. After a student has been placed temporarily in the EL program, their services will begin as usual, and the student will need to be screened when in-person schooling resumes. Once the district can administer the screener, the student's Infinite Campus records need to be updated accordingly. Another option for screening students is to schedule a time for parents to bring the student to the school to be screened, while of course practicing all of the appropriate safety and social distancing guidelines. And I believe that's happening for some other tests and screeners as well. ESSA contains an identification timeline for identifying EL students and notifying their parents of that identification. The district must identify and notify parents of ELs within 30 calendar days for students enrolled at the beginning of the school year and 14 calendar days for students enrolling after the beginning of the year. USED has not issued an extension or a waiver of the identification timeline due to the pandemic at this time. That's probably the question that we've been getting most often right now. So once a student is identified as an EL placed in the EL program, whether that's temporary or permanent placement, as I stated before, those EL services should begin immediately. And our guidance document provides some considerations on how to provide EL services remotely. All EL students have what's called a program service plan, or PSP, that outlines their EL services and accommodations. And once the PSP has been developed, the school schedules a meeting with the stakeholders, including the parents, to agree on the best services and accommodations for the student. And there are two options for conducting the PSP during the pandemic, or the PSP meeting, sorry. The district or school can schedule an in-person meeting while abiding by all of those safety protocols, or the meeting can be conducted virtually, whatever works best for the family and the school. The guidance document contains some questions that need to be discussed during a virtual PSP meeting just to make sure that all of the requirements are met. And our guidance document is posted on our English Learner and Immigrant Resources webpage. It's also been emailed to all of our district Title III English Learner coordinators, and we'll update and redistribute that guidance accordingly if needed based on any new information from USED. And of course, if you have any questions about this, you can contact me, Erin Suddeth, or Jessica Sanderson, and we'd be happy to answer those for you. And I can also answer any questions now.
All right.
Perfect. No questions.
Thank you. We appreciate
You're
your
welcome.
time with us.
All right.
Does anybody have any questions or comments about anything that we've discussed today? No. All right. Well, that was our last agenda item. I guess if there's no other business, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
This is Teresa Nicholas. I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
It's David Trimble. I'll second that motion.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. All right. It looks like our next meeting will be on November 17th. I do appreciate everybody's availability today and making yourselves available remotely. I think that we were able to run through things pretty efficiently. But again, thank you to everybody that made it and to our presenters as well. All right. We'll see you in November.
Joy, do we know if the time will be in the morning or the afternoon of November 17th?
Well, as of right now, it will be at 9 in the morning. We had a conflict with the meeting in July was why it was in the afternoon. There's no real reason for that. Do you have a preference?
No, I just wanted to block it on my calendar so
Okay.
I would know, because I was assuming that today was afternoon, and so that's why I wanted to make sure I had it correct. Thank you.
All right. Now, normally they are will be 9 until 12. Eastern time is our normal meeting. If you recall, we used to the meetings were a little bit longer. And we had lunch and those, and you know, now I don't have to have travel time and all of that with our virtual meetings. Now, if that changes in the near future, then we may have to give it some other kind of thought. But for now, let's plan on it remaining at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, it's good to see everybody. Stay
And
safe.
hopefully
Yeah.
we will have our vacancies filled by our November meeting, but I have not heard anything from the governor's office yet regarding those appointments. So just hang on, and I'll let you know as soon as I hear.
Sounds good. Appreciate you, Joy.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.